All right, I think we're live now. So my guest today is Godless Engineer, and we're going to be discussing anti-theism, what it is, what the philosophy of anti-theism is. Perhaps he can help me understand this online community. And obviously, I think I've been a critic of secular ideology in general and Enlightenment ideology in general. So I'm sure there's going to be some back and forth on the subject of anti-theism once Godless Engineer explains it to me. So, first of all, you do, addressing you specifically or directly, you do run a YouTube channel. Perhaps you could describe your YouTube career, um, what you talk about on your channel, anything else. If you want to give a plug here, it'd be a good time.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm the Godless Engineer. On my channel, I tackle a lot of religious topics and some political topics on occasion.
Mhm.
I mainly respond to videos or have interviews or discussions with people. I also do live streams every Friday night. And my position is, anti-theistic. I don't like religion, and I think that eventually religion will indeed go away through education and through being able to explain these so-called supernatural things with natural processes, and people coming to the realization that we don't need a god. And I think that once we shed that God belief, we'll be a better society.
All right, so maybe you've done this a little bit in that introduction, but what would your definition of anti-theism be?
I would say that my definition of anti-theism is basically being very antagonistic to the idea of religion in general. I think that religion in general has caused a lot of problems in society, and I think that people would be better off without religion, but I don't think that it needs to be ripped away from people. I think that it just will eventually dissolve out of society, and I think that anything that we can do to, I guess, help that like dissolving thing happen would be
So
good for society.
I'm getting that, to put it more crisply, anti-theism is the belief that religion is bad. You've said that several times, but what I guess my question, as somebody who talks a lot about this, is what do you mean by religion, right? Because I feel that there's a lot of vagaries surrounding what religion is and isn't, and because of that, people sort of dodge around the ideologies they do and don't like based on how they define these terms or don't define them. Hitchens was a great example of that. Religion applied to every single ideology he didn't like, and he never used a consistent definition. So, do you have a consistent definition in this conversation? Is it theism? Is it some theological persuasion? Is it some other sociological feature of a belief system or a worldview?
I would say that religion, as far as what I guess the definition that I'm using, would be any like set of beliefs that are dogmatically held or have a set of beliefs that center around a venerated object or person, generally employing supernatural characteristics. I'm not
Well,
sure what
I
Google
mean, until
defines
you said supernatural characteristics, you were describing almost every human belief system that's ever existed,
um,
including secular humanism.
how is secular humanism supernatural?
Well, no, I said until you said supernatural. So supernaturalism is the critical thing here.
Right.
Because, for instance, communism, right? Would
Okay.
communism be a religion?
I would not classify communism
It
as a
wouldn't.
religion.
But it matched every definition up until you said supernatural. So religion is simply every supernatural belief system.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I disagree with that. I don't think that you have to dogmatically hold to like any certain version, I guess, of communism. I mean,
Okay,
I
but no, I'm trying to get a definition of religion.
okay.
I
How
want to
about
know,
this?
like,
How about this? How about we work off of the dictionary version? The dictionary version is the belief in and worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a personal god or gods. And I would
okay,
say that belief and worship is dogmatically held.
I don't know what dogmatically means.
Well,
I mean, people use it sloppily, I should say.
okay.
So, is dogmatically held part of the definition, or is it a claim on top of the definition?
Well, no, I mean, I would say that dogmatic is part of the definition.
So, what
Dogmatic
does it
is
mean?
inclined to lay down principles as incontrovertibly true. That's what dogmatic is, and I would say that.
So, it means if you believe that a principle is uncontrovertible, then you believe that and incontrovertible, you mean it should not be up to question, right?
Well, I mean, I believe that's what incontrovertible would mean.
Okay, so if a secular humanist says that human rights are incontrovertible, are therefore a secular humanist a dogmatic believer?
No, I would not say that they're dogmatic believer,
Well,
and I
you
would
just
say I
met
would
your
say that the
definition, didn't you?
dogmatic applies to what the religion teaches rather than what individual people believe.
That you just contradicted yourself. You said 5 seconds ago that dogmatic meant you held to an incontrovertible principle, and
Well,
now you're
no, no, no,
saying
no. I
only apply.
said
Hold on. Now you're saying it applies to only some beliefs that are incontrovertible, and
no,
other
no, no,
ones
no.
that.
I said that it directly applies to the religion. That's what I said. I said that it's the religion that is dogmatic, not the people and their beliefs.
Okay.
I'm not contradicting myself here, although you're
Yeah,
trying
you're
really
making the
hard to make
definition
me
very
confused.
confused because I couldn't tell you now what. So, all people who believe in God have religion by this definition.
I would say anybody that believes in a I guess like systematic or like any kind of definition that has any kind of description of what this God does, is, or is like, I would say is part of a religion of some way.
Okay. So the two qualities of religion are that people believe in some kind of supernatural being or they're theists, and they believe and they have incontrovertible principles. But people who have incontrovertible principles and aren't theists aren't religious. And people who may believe in spiritualism but don't have principles are also not religious. Is that the definition?
I could you say that again?
Okay. So what I got from your definition was that you're proposing that religion has two features to it. A, it's theistic, aka the person believes in some supernatural god or gods, and B, that the religion contains incontrovertible principles or objective principles or principles that people believe in above all other things. So that somebody who was a believer in incontrovertible principles but did not believe in a god would not be religious, aka communists and secular humanists, and people who believed in a god but had no principles would also not be religious.
Well, I mean, you're totally separating out the two things here. There's the believer, and then there's the religion. Believers can
I'm
change
trying
the
to come
religion.
to
I thought we were talking
a
about the
crisp
definition of
definition.
religion because we want to be all pedantic and stuff, right?
Well, I want to know. Okay, let me give you an example. Right, I can tell you don't agree with my statement of your definition. Would, for instance, Christianity would be a religion? Would communism be a religion?
I would not call communism a religion for the
Would
second
Confucianism
time.
be would Confucianism be a religion?
I mean, I haven't really looked into Confucianism.
Would Platonism be a religion?
I don't know what. Why are we going through this?
Because I want to understand what you mean by religion. How you said you're against religion, and I'm getting in a very unclear. I just listed four of the more popular religion belief systems of all time, and we're having a hard time classifying them into being religions or not. And you're telling me you're totally against these things called religions, and you can't tell me whether Aristotelianism is a religion.
Mm, okay. I mean, if
So,
this
so
is
my
if this
note.
is all that you want to really discuss about it,
No,
then
I'm
there's no
asking you for
discussion for
your.
us to have, really. I mean,
Well,
if
no,
you
I
want to
mean,
go
like,
on 2 hours of defining what religion is, and you want to
no,
play
I
this
was expecting you to
dictionary
give me.
fallacy, then that's
I was
fine.
expecting you to give me a crisp definition in the first few seconds. But so, like, for instance, like, how did you come to the conclusion that that religion was was terrible.
Well, I mean, it's pretty evident in society. I mean, the societies around the
How?
world that are the most religious are often the societies with like the most violence in them. The ones that are, you know, the most secular are often the best ones to live in. If you just look at the Catholic Church in general, they are not any kind of, moral, moral entity that anybody should really look up to. I mean, the evidence is all around. I mean, if you look at your daily
Well,
news,
the difficulty
it doesn't
is
fail. Hold on,
attribute.
I am fucking talking right now. You understand? Do you
I
understand how
understand you're
conversation
on my
works?
channel right now, so
No,
we can
do you
direct the
understand how
conversation as
conversation
we
works?
want.
I talk, then you talk. I talk, you talk. That's how
Okay, I thought you
conversation
were.
works.
Look, man, I'm trying to be as accommodating as possible. Asking a
You're interrupting
definition
me.
is
How is
not
that
aggressive.
accommodating? You're being a dick.
Look, man, I
No,
am
fine. Go
running a
ahead,
civil
talk.
YouTube.
Whatever.
Hello?
Go ahead, talk.
Okay. So we're trying to get just an idea of how we would compare a belief system as being good or bad, right? So we could say, okay, is it correlated with with rich societies or poor societies is one way. Another way is to look inside societies and do actual sociological studies. Now, I'm sure I know that Friended had brought this up to you before, but I'm familiar with some of these studies, but we just have like decades of data where we look at people with intrinsic religiosity and see that it positively correlates with all sorts of good things. That combined with the fact that if we look historically, we do not really see any type of negative consequence coming from societies that have, well, I should say, atheistic worldviews like Confucianism versus societies that have theistic worldviews like Christianity. So, for instance, if you were to compare the medieval Christian society with the medieval Chinese society, or the late medieval, as I like to say, or the Renaissance, right? You will see that in many ways the Christian worldview was more open to learning. You see a massive explosion of learning inside the Christian one that you do not see inside the society dominated by a philosophy that does not have a central god as a figurehead, and so by your previous definition is not a religion. So I find that both by historical analysis and also by peer-reviewed research, the claim you're making just seems to be kind of questionable.
Oh, is it my turn to talk now?
Go
Am I
ahead.
actually going to be able to talk, or is this
Take
where
the
I say
floor.
one thing and then
Take
you
the floor,
interrupt
sir.
me?
Take the floor.
Okay. So you say that there's all of this evidence that atheistic societies don't actually produce like good societies, whereas the religious societies produce good societies. Is that correct? Is that what you said?
Uh, no, that's not what I said.
Okay.
I said that sociological studies done where we compare populations that are adjusted for show that there's a positive effect for intrinsic religiosity. Plus, if we take a historical perspective and go through societies, not just in time, I mean, the effect that I think you want to do is you want to compare secular Sweden to animalistic Africa, right? Animistic Africa, right? And but that's not. There's a lot of problems with using that analysis scientifically. So, but if you take the long historical view and compare societies of similar technological achievement, the relationship on a society-wide comparison does not seem to bear out very clearly.
Okay. I love how you're just building a straw man case for me and then knocking it down as if I
Go ahead.
actually said anything like that.
No, I mean, what is your case?
Well, my case is that while religion is a good vehicle for control, that doesn't automatically mean that it is the best system that produces the most quote unquote intrinsically good societies or positive societies. I mean, people in the past have used religion for control, and that has been its primary use is control. I mean, I would ask you, like, who actually thought up like the moral laws behind these religions? Who are the actual one? Like, was it actually God from above that gave them these moral laws? Or did the men themselves come up with it, codify it into this religion, and then use that religion in order to extend their control onto a group of people? And then you
So
start going back in history about like how religion in history has produced intrinsically positive societies or something. I mean, stop me if I'm wrong.
yeah, I will stop you because that's not what I said. I said the comparisons between societies that believed in a god as their primary worldview do not look noticeably worse, and in some ways look better than the societies that followed more atheistic philosophies like Platonism or Confucianism. Or
Okay.
sorry, Platonism is not atheistic, but Confucianism would be an example. And some forms of Buddhism are also atheistic. So, by your previously stated definition, would not be religions. So, if you compare Tibetan Buddhism with Christian Europe, at the same time period with similar levels of wealth, you see that Europe is a much more ideologically dynamic place, much more open to learning, and you see that Tibet is stagnant and doesn't go anywhere. And so, no, I don't think there's you can really. I think that it's hard, right? Because these comparisons are naturally very uneven, right? But it does tell me that there's not, by looking at history, there's not a very clear indication that societies that have atheistic worldviews are somehow a lot better, because the most dynamic society that we saw in the last 2000 years was by far the Western European nations of Christendom.
Okay, how can you really compare these quote unquote atheistic worldviews when the only thing that defines atheism is the fact that you don't believe in a God? And mind you, America is set up as a secular nation. So it protects religion, but at the same time, within its own government, it holds no particular religion above the others.
I think you
So
made a great point there, that you cannot compare atheism in the abstract to religion. You have to compare an atheistic worldview to a religious worldview. That's
what?
the only fair
Okay, what's
comparison.
an
So
atheistic?
you couldn't compare Christianity to atheism. You have to compare Christianity to communism, or Christianity to Confucianism, or Christianity to some other belief system that that makes similar moral statements. And that's the only fair comparison. So that's a very good point you made. But furthermore, on the sociological level, the studies that I could cite them, right? If you would like me to read them off, but a friend had already did, so I don't know if I really need to do this. There's a great TonyJack.org has a compilation, and if you go on the Matt Dillahunty debate that had a few months ago, they did a very good compilation of all the research that we've done that methodologically demonstrates that people who have intrinsic religiosity, when you control for everything, have a much higher capacity for trust, goodness, and giving inside their personal relations. And again, we just have so much evidence to back this up. It's hard to know what a better sociological result would be for the comparison. So based on these two observations, I think that the case that religion has a positive influence both on a microcosmic and historical scale is pretty unassailable, although I'm open to hear what your perspective might be.
Well, I mean, my perspective is that for every good thing that you could find or put forth about religion, you can also point out the negatives and the horrible things that religion has done. I mean, you speak of history, and there was a point in time in France where the Catholic, like government, basically was killing off all of the Protestants. The reason why the Protestants came over onto like the North America and founded the quote unquote New World is to escape religious persecution. So I don't understand this whole thing about how Europe was so diverse and whatnot when religion in Europe was trying to stamp out all of the newer versions of the same religion that were popping up.
You make a very good point here. We can't just isolate historical problems and treat them as if they're evidence for something being bad, because every society ever had bad things happening. For instance, you mentioned France, right? Well, just 200 years after the massacre of the Huguenots, the secular atheist Jacobites, uh, or Jacobin, sorry, I get this confused constantly, pardon me, massacred huge numbers of French peasants on an attempt to drive out religiosity. So we can't just sit here complaining about things that happened in history. We have to have some methodology for comparing the broad swath of these effects. And as I see it, I see two ways. We compare societies that have been around for thousands of years with theist and atheist worldviews, and we compare the net effect of societies, not just not just essentially they did this one bad thing once, but just how they functioned as societies and whether they could sustain themselves and whether they allowed human thriving. Or failing that, because that is very inexact, we go again to the peer reviewed scientific research that we have on the effects of religiosity in individuals, and we use the sociology to guide our opinion on whether religion is good or not. And again, as I said before, we have so much evidence on this. It's hard to know how anti-theism survives coming in contact with it.
Well, you still haven't actually told me the atheist worldview. I mean, is there a certain like set of beliefs or something like that? I know you're trying to paint me into the corner of, oh,
I
atheism's a
don't believe in an
religion.
atheist worldview.
Then, I mean, just like, because the only thing as far as atheists go is that we don't believe in God. There's no way that you can attach any kind of moral sense to that.
But this is my problem with this, right? Because in order to say that some moral system is better than the other, you can only compare moral systems, well, comparatively. You can't compare them to an abstract, right? Because no matter what your idea is, it will have some bad things attached to it. But a negative idea will never have anything attached to it because it's simply a negative idea. So, in order to say that some ideology is bad, you have to show that it's worse than another one that could replace it. For instance, you know that secular humanism has many massacres attached to it over the years, and it's only been really followed for 100 years. Yet it still has massacres associated with it. Crimes have been committed in the name of secular humanism, starting with the French Revolution and then continuing on into the 20th century. Now, in order for secular humanism to be bad, those massacres would not be enough. You would have to show me through comparisons to other societies that, well, either secular humanism did worse than what it was supposed to replace. Or if you wanted to defend secular humanism, you'd have to show that it did better than what it replaced. And that's the proper way to compare worldviews, not comparing them to some abstract view that's purely negation. I mean, because that's not fair. You would agree with that, right? You can't compare an idea to pure
Well,
negation.
I mean, honestly, I mean, you can't claim that secular humanism caused massacres because that is completely antithetical to what we know as secular humanism.
Well, you don't think that people claiming to be humanists did massacre, kill people in the name of humanism? Are you familiar
No,
with
I didn't.
the French
Is that what
Revolution?
I fucking said?
Well, I don't know, but how is that different
I'm
than
ta-
just saying that? How is
I'm
this not?
talking about secular humanism, the whole ideal of it, not how people have implemented it or how many assholes follow it. I'm not talking about the individual people. I'm talking about the idea in general. You keep placing people as some kind of representative of the idea on the whole. I think we could probably agree that somebody can take an idea and then use it for their own gain or whatnot. Like you keep mentioning the French Revolution where they did all of that shit. And I would say that while they didn't believe in a god, they were still pushing a very anti-humanistic like agenda there. And I would say that that particular thing is in no way representative of the secular humanism that we have now, nor is it representative of the atheist community now, or even the idea of atheism now.
But you know what I'm going to say here, right?
No, I
Like,
am not a mind reader.
well, you judge Christianity not by the ideals it promoted, but by how people implemented it.
Oh, no, no, no. I
No,
judge
then
I
you
judge
turned around
Christianity
and when
by
I
the
when I gave you
ideals.
the examples of bad things being done in the name of a philosophy you believe in, you said we have to judge it on the ideals and not how it's been implemented. So it just turns into a no truth Scotsman fallacy. If you say that secular humanism can essentially doesn't have to account for the times when it's been used to justify bad things, but we have to hold Christianity to account. That's just a double standard. It's a naked double standard, I would say.
No, that is not anything that I said.
Well, perhaps you could clarify.
Honestly, I forgot even where that started.
So you said that humanists, which the French Revolutionaries certainly consider themselves.
Oh,
I believe that humanism actually got its. I could be wrong about this, but I believe humanism, the term itself, actually comes from the French Revolution.
okay, hold on,
They were
hold on.
responsible for a huge number of massacres during that time period. And I said that, well, we'd have to do a broad comparison, right? We couldn't just say that, well, secularism in the ideal wouldn't do this. Therefore, we don't count we don't count, the massacres as secularists because that's against the ideal of secularism. We have to, or if we do that, we have to give Christianity the same type of treatment. We can't say Christianity, you get judged on your historical implementation, but uh, secularism just gets to get judged by its abstract ideals. And if they ever go wrong, well, that's not real secularism. That doesn't make any sense, does it?
Well, no, I didn't say any of that. So I appreciate you building up all these straw men everywhere and laying them on me. But whatever.
Well, just
Actually,
clarify what you mean,
you
and we
claimed
can
that
move
I
forward.
don't. You claimed that I do not judge Christianity based on its tenets, but rather on like the people and how they implement it. No, I judge Christianity and Catholicism on what it actually says. So, I mean, there's one point at which you're wrong.
Well, then why did you bring up the Huguenots?
I didn't bring up the Huguenots.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. What was the example in France where they killed a bunch of Protestants? I thought that was the Huguenots.
It's when the Catholic the government was aligned with Catholicism and the Catholic Church,
Yes.
and so they persecuted the Protestants.
Oh, so it's like the Huguenots, but not the Huguenots then. Okay,
I
well,
guess.
okay, but if you were just judging Catholicism on its stated ideals, then why did you bring up that massacre?
Because in the Bible it says, kill those that are different from you. It literally says it right there in the Bible, and that's all they were doing, was stamping out those that believed differently or those that worshiped their God differently and whatnot. It says it right in the
It says
Bible
a
to kill
variety
people.
of things about this. It also says to help the outsider, is in the tale of the Good Samaritan. Now, when you go to religions, you have to actually interpret things as a totality, not simply take one quote and run with it, which is why you have most of the time Christians, or not most of the time, you have in doctrine strict rules for just war and the prohibition against killing civilians, as clearly outlined in the doctrine of just war theory developed by Thomas Aquinas, which should have been in effect during these massacres, but it was not because people are evil. People naturally commit massacres, just like secularists naturally commit massacres, as they did in the French Revolution. And so, what I'm saying here is that, we can talk about the ideals of religion if we want to. And I think that they are indeed superior. Well, I mean, it's hard to say superior because most of the time secularism is just religious ideals with certain things I don't like subtracted out of them. So, you know, uh, be that what it is. At any rate, I think that you have to take the broader view, right? We would have to compare societies and we'd have to compare them, not just say this society committed a massacre and it believed the thing I don't like, therefore that ideology is naturally bad.
Okay, but I told you that I didn't do that. I told you
Okay.
that I judge it based on the actual reading of the text and how people have obviously interpreted that text in the past. So I don't understand why you keep saying that, oh, I'm judging Christianity because a whole bunch of dipshits went out there and killed a bunch of people in the name of God. And it's like, it's not because they went out and did it, it's because their religion allowed them to do it. And the reverence that we show religion today hides people and allows them to do these things without suffering any kind of repercussions.
But did the humanism of the Jacobin allow them to murder all those Catholic peasants?
No, but
It
humanism is
wasn't,
not a
right?
religion.
Though it's a worldview, though, right?
Humanism, huh?
we have to compare ideas to each other, right? We have to compare ideas to each other.
Okay,
So list a
where does
worldview that you can
massacre
compare
work
to.
into humanism, like the humanistic worldview?
Well, they're backwards. They're holding back progress. Therefore, we can get rid of them because they're destroying our progressive society.
Hmm.
They're carrying us forward into backwards religious belief.
Point
Therefore,
out where in the ideal of humanism that exists.
well, but the massacring civilians does not exist in the ideal of Catholicism. It exists in a
Ma-
historical passage, which was, by the way, just as a historical point, Godless Engineer, the people who murdered the Huguenots and whatever other massacres you might be talking about that occurred apparently at the same time but are not that, they were not just flipping open their Bibles, reading Leviticus or Kings and going, "Oh yeah, that the Bible told us to do this." They were operating under political orders from an apparatus of the King of France. And that was the direct motivation for their killing the Huguenots. Nothing to do with a theological argument directly, if we're going to be historically accurate.
was the king not following what the Catholic Church wanted? I mean, if the king went against the Catholic Church, was he not punished for that?
But the thing is, but the Catholic Church is just an adherent to an ideology. It's like saying, well, were the people who massacred the peasants by the Jacobin, were they not operating in accordance with what the humanists wanted? Well, perhaps, but these humanists that ordered the massacres of these peasants, I imagine you believe that they were misinterpreting their ideas, that they weren't living up to them.
Okay, yeah,
And
but in
that's fundamentally
humanism,
what I say about the King of France who ordered the murdering of Protestants. That indeed he thought he was in possession of this ideology, just like the humanists 200 years after him thought they were in possession of the humanist ideology. And yet his human weakness caused him to make an unmerciful decision and kill people that shouldn't have been killed. It's more or less the same explanation both ways.
okay, does humanism have a passage in it where God tells Moses to go and kill a whole bunch of people just for worshiping different gods?
I'm afraid there's no Moses in humanism.
No, there's
But you
not. You know
partially,
why? Because humanism is just a general ideal, right? It's an idea. Humanism is a worldview, but it doesn't have these dogmatic passages contained within it that show what God wants. I mean, I've read through the Bible and I'm currently rereading through the Bible. God orders massacres all the time. He even massacres his own chosen people several times. So,
humanism
I
does
mean,
have principles that cause people to murder.
what?
Said humanism does have passages or principles that cause people to murder. It says that it
Where?
needs a revolution. Well, in the case of in the case of the 18th century humanism, it has a revolutionary commission to bring the world into the new secular age. And to accomplish that commission, it has frequently killed a lot of people. And if we include communism under this banner of humanism, well, the body count goes up so high that you could be argue you could reasonably argue that communism killed as many people in 100 years as all of Christianity killed in 1,500.
Okay,
Now,
I don't.
so we see that, okay, so what I'm getting here is that both worldviews have reasons that people kill people. In the Bible, it's that God may or may not have said that this group of people should be killed at some time in the past. In humanism, it's the implication that certain people stand in the way of progress and the restoration of some secular utopia, and they need to be gotten rid of in order to bring forward progress. So both of them have passages that could be interpreted to encourage violence. But in order to figure out which worldview is the more violent, we would have to not focus on the superficial description of how they potentially justify violence. We would have to actually see how they behaved. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think the behavior of a group is important, but also the religious doctrine behind that group is also important. It's important
But
to
let's
how
take
they
communism.
behave.
for instance, right? So
No, please
communism
quit
has no
bringing up
God,
communism.
no scripture.
Communism and humanism, and communism and atheism, they have no relation to one another. I
Well,
really
no, but
wish
this
you would quit
communism is a
bringing that
type
up.
of communism is a type of atheism, right? So we can see from communism quite
No, it's not.
clearly that you can kill a lot of people without having a God to tell you so, right?
Okay, point to where in a humanist worldview that it says massacre people.
Point to when in a communist worldview it says massacre people.
No, what?
Point to where in a communist worldview it says massacre people.
Okay, you're not answering my question with another question.
Okay,
I specifically
this is
asked
my
you in
answer.
humanism
This is my
to
answer. Do you
point
want to listen
to where it
my answer
says
here? Do you want to listen
to
my answer?
massacre people.
There is no passage in humanism that says massacre people, and there is no passage in communism that says massacre people.
But there
Yet
is a
somehow,
passage in the Bible
let me
that
finish,
says it.
Godless engineer. Let me finish. Yet somehow, inside the religion of the worldview of communism, if we would prefer to call it that, somehow in this worldview of communism, despite having no passage saying massacre people, this ideology managed to be one of the bloodiest, if not the bloodiest. And I think it's the bloodiest. It's managed to become the bloodiest ideology that has ever existed on the face of this earth, with no God, with no commandments, and with no scripture that says massacre people. So it seems from this example that it is very possible to have an ideology and a worldview accomplish horrific massacres, being fully atheist, fully secular, and having no scripture and no deity commanding such. That is my point, and that was why I answered it in the negative.
Okay, again, communism has nothing to do with humanism or atheism. So I get that you keep conflating the two, but I mean, communism is not a type of it. So
communism is an atheist. Are you saying on this stream that communism wasn't atheist? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm saying that communism is in no way related to a theology or a like hold on, am I not? Communism has no aspect of religion contained within it. Please point in the communist theory or communist ideals or anything like that. Point to where it specifies what the religion should be.
It clearly specifies in almost all communist writings that the religion needs to be, that the society that emerges from the worker state needs to be atheistic because religion is the opiate of the masses. This is clear in almost all communist writings, and to deny this is to simply advocate something that is manifestly not true in their writings. All communist writings have an element of atheism in them. Maoism did, Trotskyism did, Leninism did, and the original Marxism did, and you better believe that Engels wrote reams about how religion was terrible. How could you maintain here that atheism isn't central or isn't a central pillar of? I'm not saying that all atheists are communists, but to say that communists weren't atheists seems to me just a commendation of absolute ahistoricity.
Well, state atheism is completely different than atheism in general. So you comparing state atheism or state atheistic things to atheism or lumping it under the banner of atheism or even humanism for whatever reason is not a true representation of the situation.
So you're saying it's atheism but not true atheism.
I did not say it's not true atheism. I'm saying they're two distinct things. I would love it if you would quit shoving words in my mouth.
How is state atheism not atheism?
State atheism replaces God with the state, and and requires you to worship the state as if it were a supernatural being.
So I thought at the beginning that you said atheism was just a lack of belief. Maybe you didn't say that, but I got the impression you believed that, right?
Well, atheism is a lack of belief in a God, but state atheism is completely different from just having a lack of belief in a God.
State atheism meets the definition. It falls clearly into the definition you just provided.
Well, no, I really can't believe that I'm having to explain state atheism like this. State atheism is just a completely different thing than like atheism as a lack of belief. Now, people can be atheistic, and but I don't see like a government as being able to be atheistic. It can be secular. Like, I mean, you could say that state atheism is secular
Okay.
because it doesn't concern a God, but at the same time, state atheism replaces God with the state so that people are worshiping the state. So they're still worshiping something, whereas in atheism, it doesn't have that. I mean, it literally is just a lack of belief. I
I feel
mean,
like we're trying to use definitions so that we've defined things out in a way that if a government becomes atheistic and does horrible things, it then ceases to become real atheism. Because as soon as atheism takes on state powers, it therefore goes from being atheism to state atheism. And therefore, like for instance, I could say, well, what they had in all previous times was was medieval Christianity, and now modern Christianity doesn't have the same. You would not accept that, right? You wouldn't accept me going into the past and finding all instances where Christianity had had done bad things and then calling that by a special name and saying, well, that's the bad type of Christianity, and my Christianity is a Christianity that encompasses all the good things but none of the bad things. I mean, you would not accept that, I take it, right?
I mean, I don't think that I'm saying that at all. So thank you again for shoving shit in my mouth.
Well, look, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. You can just say, I agree with you, and we can go on. Like, for instance, right? Like, at every time a government takes power and it's atheist, then you've said by definition there never can be any large scale massacres by atheism,
Did not
because
say that.
by an atheist force, because once atheism gets power, it will then cease being real atheism. Do you see how what I'm objecting to here? Maybe
I
I'm
did
not
not
making
say
myself
that.
clear.
I simply did not say any of that.
No, I'm not saying you said it. I'm saying how does what you're saying not fall into. Okay, this is the misunderstanding. When I say, "Are you saying this?" What I'm saying is, tell me how what you just said distinguishes itself from this thing that I'm proposing, right? As how does classifying all examples of authoritative state power that is atheistic as state atheism not just become a mechanism for excusing atheistic problems by reclassifying it under a different name? I'm asking you, how does what you're saying, which might not be this, distinguish it itself logically from what I'm saying it could be interpreted as potentially?
Because people can be atheistic and people can hold to atheism as being just a lack of belief in a god. But just like I wouldn't say that a rock is an atheist because it lacks a belief, I don't think that a government is atheist in the sense of a theological sense. Like
So
a government can be Catholic in that it employs the Catholic like Bible, it employs Catholic rules and dogmatic beliefs and all that, and it enforces it on a group of people. A government can be Catholic because Catholic is an actual organized system of beliefs, whereas atheism is just lack of belief in God, and
so this
therefore
goes
people
back.
hold on. And so people that like, let's just say people take over a government, all of these people are atheist, right? That doesn't mean that the government is an atheistic government. If they employ like the people worshiping the state as a deity, then it is state atheism because they're replacing God with the state, and they're saying the state is infallible, and they're using that as a system of control.
So from what I'm getting here is that atheism, no action could ever be atheistic, is what you're saying, right? No belief can ever be atheistic.
Well, I mean, other than just lacking that belief, I mean, I would say that the Gnostic atheists, they have a belief that God definitely doesn't exist in any kind of form and can exist.
So then
So,
it
I mean,
ceases to become, right? It ceases to become something that we can compare things to, right? We can no longer use an atheism as a basis of comparison since it's simply
I would say that
a different way of saying just pure negation, right?
I would say that you cannot compare atheism to any government system or any other system of beliefs or system of control. No, I feel that it is completely different.
Well, but we can't compare atheism to Christianity under this rubric either.
Well, I mean, we can compare atheism to Christianity under the whole idea of whether or not God exists, because that
Well,
is the
yeah,
only
but
question that
we
atheism
can't compare
answers.
it in terms of whether one is good for humanity and one isn't, because they're not even the same kind of thing.
I would say that atheism is neutral and religion is very much a negative impact on
Okay,
society and
but
people.
no, that's not the question I asked. I said, can you compare atheism to Christianity? Because it seems like you're saying that you can't, right?
Well, no, I said that we can, but only on the idea that of whether or not a God exists. Atheism
I
has
mean, there's
no
still
moral
okay. So
declarations. It has no moral rules. It has no system of
I thought
beliefs. It
you
has
can't
no.
compare it in a I thought I meant this clarification. You can compare the two sociologically, is what you're saying. You cannot compare atheism to Christianity sociologically.
Well, I mean, I really don't know. I haven't thought of that about that particular thing. I mean, I think that you can compare it in that atheism would be a neutral impact on it, so it would be more or less like a control, and then you could compare that
Well,
to the effects that Catholicism or Christianity or whatever has on a society.
no, but it couldn't be that, right? Because what you just said, right? If atheism is a control group, right? If the effect manifests itself, if the effect of this thing results in massacres of the of dissidents, right? If that's the effect you're testing for, and you're using atheism as the control group, and the effect appears both in your test and in your control, you would turn around and tell me that we should consider the effect not to have occurred in the control group, because the control group, when it manifests this behavior, is not actually using atheism, it's using something else that isn't atheism. And atheism is negation, so it couldn't even possibly be. It couldn't even possibly have happened because Godless Engineer, we've done this experiment historically. We have tried creating atheist states, and they've resulted in the same massacres that we've seen and the same general behavior that we've seen in religious ones. So I'm afraid that if we're treating atheism as a control, we have to grapple with the reality that we've seen similar effects under similar conditions. And trying to take the examples where we have seen similar effects and rename them something won't obfuscate that general observation or that general reality that we're dealing with right now historically.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've already covered in this how there are no atheistic governments and how a government can't be atheistic. So I don't know why you keep trying to shove that into my face, but I mean, you seem to want to do that.
Because you understand the problem of saying no government can be atheistic if
No,
we're
I don't.
using atheism as a control group for an experiment about how governments behave, right?
No, I don't.
Because you've just if you say that we're going to compare governments that are atheists to governments that are non, because that's the question, right? We're going to compare society, or is it societies, right? You've just told me that you will never accept an observation of the effect in one of your groups, which violates the scientific principle.
I don't understand how what I've said violates any scientific principles.
If you say we're going to judge societies, if we're going to judge societies, right, based on how horribly they treat dissidents, right? And this is control group A, which is atheists, and this is test group B, which is theist societies. But then when we run the experiment on this thing, right? About will these societies kill their dissidents? And some societies in control group A kill dissidents, and some societies in test group B kill their dissidents. Then I turn around and go, okay, look, both the control group and the test group both had instances where we killed dissidents. So there can't be a difference. You turn around and say, well, the instances where the control group kill their dissidents, well, they can't actually be atheists because governments can't be atheists, so it doesn't count. that ruins the experiment that you proposed earlier. Do you see how that works?
Well, I can see how I might have confused you or whatnot, or even stumbled over myself. But I would say that in that particular experiment, you would need to classify the atheist portion as more secular rather than atheist. So I
Isn't
would say
secular just a
you
government that
could
doesn't
paint
have
it as
religion?
secular because secular is without God, and so that would be the control group. So I'm sorry for
Well,
misspeaking.
the communist societies certainly count as that by your
No.
definition. They were secular, absolutely. As a matter of fact, regimes like Mao went to great lengths to expunge theism from their societies at a great cost of blood and to introduce cultural secularism. As a matter of fact, Mao had an entire revolution dedicated to just that purpose called the Cultural Revolution.
Okay, and would you say that communism is integral to secularism?
No, communism is a type of secularism,
No, it's
just like
not.
the societies.
It is legit not.
How? By your
Communism is
definition,
completely
it
separate
qualifies.
to secularism.
Okay, but I thought you said secularism was just not having theism in your government or in
Well,
your society.
yeah. Secularism
Okay, then
is
it
just it
qualifies, right?
just hold on. It just means without God. That's all it means. Is
If
without
it
God.
just
So a
means
society
that,
without
communism
God,
qualifies.
and then you have other factors that factor into how that society is run, and that's how you can isolate the bad portions of whatever's going on. In the communism case or the Maoist case or whatnot, it was that state atheism type of government. That doesn't mean that
I heard your
secularism
definition right there.
is
It was
bad.
you
And
said
I'm still
secularism.
talking, so I'm going to keep on talking, and you can either shut up.
I'm sorry, but this is my channel, so
It's running on my channel too, if you don't remember. So I mean, we're
okay.
kind
But
of sharing this
we're
shit together.
we're live streaming on this channel, so I don't care if you have a mirror. I have like you're not going to talk over me. You can't.
Oh,
Okay.
so but
So
you can talk over me. So this isn't a discussion.
no,
You're
I'm
just
asking
wanting
for a
to
certain amount of
lecture me on
I'm
whatever
asking
the
for a
fuck
certain
you
amount of
think.
civility.
You're not actually wanting to have a discussion at this
Okay,
point.
go ahead. Look, go ahead. Go ahead. Take whatever time. I will come back to my point.
Okay, well, I mean, I really don't know where I was at this point. I mean, we kind of got off on the fact that you're being kind of a dick.
Okay, let me go back to the point I heard. I heard you say this, more or less quoting, secularism just emphasis means not having a god in your society or as part of your apparatus of cultural government, right?
Yes.
Okay, that was your definition. And by that definition, communism obviously qualifies. No question, by that definition, communism qualifies.
Communism is not a type of secularism. Those
It
are
meets a
two
definition.
separate ideas. Just because something like just because a concept is without a god theology in it does not mean that it is inherently theistic. Like okay, so I guess in your definition math would be secular, science would be secular, when in all reality, like God doesn't come into play for math or science or any other
Based on your
ideal
definition,
out
it would be,
there.
yes. Well, I don't know. I mean, you said government, so I believe you said government. So we're talking about societies, right?
Well,
I mean,
yes, we are,
math
but
wouldn't qualify because it's not a government. I guess if you had a government based on math, it would be secular. Although, in the case of, say, Pythagoras was a cult leader from Greece who believed in one god who's comprised entirely of mathematical reason. So I guess in that case, you could have a theistic government based on mathematics. Uh, but that's a weird example. What I'm saying is, you gave me a definition of secularism, and by your own definition, atheism qualifies.
atheism qualifies as what?
Secular. By your definition that you just gave me of secular.
Well, I mean, atheism is very distinct from secularism. Atheism answers the one question of whether or not God exists or whether or not, um,
I'm sorry.
whether, huh?
Did I misspeak? Sorry, I said communism. Communism is secular under your definition. Maybe I misspoke. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, I don't think that it is inherently secular. I mean, what I'm trying to say here is that communism doesn't have a theology like integrated into it. I'm saying that what I'm saying is that secularism and communism, two completely separate things, but you're trying to mash them together like they're two puzzle pieces that don't fit. They're two separate concepts.
What I'm saying is you gave me a definition of secularism. And by your definition of secularism, communism qualified as secular. You gave me the definition, and I said, by the definition that Godless Engineer gave me, this applies to communism as well. You said it was just means a government or society that is not organized around a religious or theistic principle. That's what you told me. And by that definition, communism qualifies. By your definition.
No, you're misapplying the word secular into something that it just simply doesn't cover. So, I mean, you can keep forcing it all day long, but that doesn't make you correct in how you're using secularism or how you're trying to paint communism as a version of secularism, which it isn't. They're two completely separate different things. So you go ahead, keep doing that all you want to, but I mean,
you're the one who gave me the definition.
Yeah, that's right. Secularism is, just, or secular, the word is just without God. That's all that it means.
Okay, so we're the
communism has no theological component to it in which to say that it is secular.
You're almost there. You're almost there. You got the two sides. You said secular is just without God, and then you said communism is without God. Therefore, by your definition, logically,
no. I said that there's no theological component to it. I did not say it's without God or anything like that. I said there's no theological component. So it doesn't answer anything about theology in the whole communist ideal.
So what was your definition of secularism? I mean, I don't understand how this is so hard to understand.
I find myself in the same fucking boat at this point.
What do you think I'm not understanding right now? Because
anything that I'm saying.
We're just having a problem with syllogistic logic here.
No, I'm not having a problem with syllogistic logic here. You're having trouble with, actually listening to what I'm saying. Communism is an economic and political system, whereas secularism is something completely different.
Okay. We'll move on. There's no way. So
secularism is literally the principle of separating of the state from religious institutions. That's all that is.
Let's. I think we've come to loggerheads here. So, what do you see? And so, as an anti-theist, what do you see as the big problems right now? And how could the removal of religion sort of stop them? I guess, right? What do you consider to be a model country for your vision?
What's a model country? Yeah. I mean, I really don't know. I mean, it would be easy for me to say like one of the secular countries, like I believe Norway secular or something like that. But I mean, then again, I don't think that like one country should be like the model that every other country follows. I just simply don't think that that's how anything is going to work.
So are you alarmed by demographic trends that show religious populations growing while non-religious ones sort of fade away?
I have not seen any of those kind of statistics, so you would need to provide those.
I study all the time, but Pew Research Center has done continuous pollings of worldwide trends in religion, and it shows that non-belief and by extension atheism is going to be precipitously dropping away and has been precipitously declining for the last 20 years. And that we may in fact be at the apex of a religiosity in continents like Europe. It actually projects the number of atheists in Europe to fall by 2 million in the next 50 years.
Okay, I haven't seen any of these things. All the stats that I've seen is that the nuns category is growing and atheists in general are growing. The last time I checked with like England or the UK and whatnot, I mean, most people over there are becoming atheistic. So I really don't know what statistics that you're talking about here, other than maybe they're probably coming from a biased source that's really projecting like
It's
high
Pew.
growth
It's
of
Pew.
religious people.
It's Pew.
Oh, okay. I like I said, I haven't seen any of those particular stats, so
So
I
I
don't.
think I think I mean I understand how both sides actually debated demographics for a while. What's going on is that essentially natives in places like England and America are losing religiosity. However, when they lose religiosity, they are essentially having almost zero children. So what we see is sort of uh, a strange paradox, whereas atheism is kind of like that strange religion in America called Shakerism, where it spreads really quickly in terms of converts, but when people convert, they don't have kids. So what happens is it's a huge explosion among certain populations, but eventually those populations get replaced because the genetic force wins out over the mimetic one, and you see the declining rate that you see clearly in the Pew projections. So this is how you can come up with studies in the short term that show an increase in irreligiosity. But then when you step back and look at the big picture that Pew gives from worldwide surveys and demographic projections, you see the exact opposite effect.
So basically, you said that religious people outfuck atheists, and therefore that's why the atheist group or community will die.
Well, I outbreed to be more precise, but yes, actually,
Outfuck.
quite
Yeah.
clearly, quite clearly from the demographic projections we see that. Do you find this alarming?
Well, I mean, considering that you're just saying this shit and you're not actually bringing stats with you
No, I
or
am.
anything.
I'll put the I literally cited one here. I'll put the if you prefer, I can put the Pew Research thing in the low bar again
Well, I
so that
mean,
Jack can read it. I said
please
it's it's
do.
it's Pew's been releasing these studies for a while now, and
Yeah, well,
they're
I
not
mean,
they're not
Pew is
new.
also the ones that say that the most religious countries are actually the ones with the most homicides. Pew would also be the ones that
Yeah,
point to how in America the nuns category is growing. Pew would also be the ones that, and I believe now I'm
yeah,
remembering them
it's all
saying
true
that
data.
I believe now I remember that Pew released research that said that Christians have, or religious people in general, have more kids than atheist people do. But at the same time, it's not like atheism is like a gene or something like that. It's not like atheists bring up their kids indoctrinated into atheism, whereas religious people indoctrinate their kids into their belief.
Well, for these macrocosmic effects, we wouldn't. I mean, we could argue about what's indoctrination and what's not. We do know that religiosity and a-religiosity are both strongly heritable, so that probabilistically you're likely to follow in the steps of your parents, just on average, right? Of course, there's conversions, and in America, there's a lot of conversions. That's a very common thing. So generally, what we see is, I mean, all of these statistics are correct, but if you take a while and sort of allow a nuanced picture to emerge, what you see is if we were to if we were to separate the populations of atheists and religious people worldwide, the religious people would be younger, they'd be more having way more families and kids, and they would be, and you're right, they would have more murders because they're on average younger, right? And young people commit murders, whereas atheists would generally be a much older population, and because of that they'd be richer, they'd be much more established, and these explain the effects that you're seeing on both the positive and negative ends of these studies. So you can kind of put them together a little bit, right?
Um, I'm sorry, what?
What I'm saying is that the studies that I'm citing, you can see how the demographics are emerging, and they give you both the good and the bad statistics. Never mind. Um, so as for the future of the West, do you see current trends in how society is being run as troubling? For instance, there's been a lot of talk on YouTube about the whole emergence of progressive identity politics, the emergence of mass migration into the West, To what extent do you or perhaps other anti-theists see these as problems?
I don't exactly know what problem you're describing.
So, for instance, let's take Europe's current struggle with, well, mass immigration and the subsequent right wing reaction. Now, most people see either the right wing reaction or the uh, European Union's dedication to mass migration as being a huge problem, right? I was curious if you saw one of those two things as being problems.
Uh, the the
Okay,
mass
well, never
the
mind,
mass
never mind. So,
the
what do you
mass
consider?
migration of what again? I'm sorry. Every I keep
So you understand that there's been a massive, well, in the last 20 years, Western countries have seen a massive influx of immigrants from the third world. This has been something that's occurred across most Western societies in North America and in Europe and in Australia.
so just mass immigration, is that a problem? Is that what you're asking?
Well, yes, or yeah. Do you consider that to be a problem?
No, I don't consider mass immigration to be a problem.
Okay.
I don't
No.
even know why this is a question as far as anti-theism goes.
Oh, well, yeah, because I guess where I was going with this question was just it seems to me that if mass immigration continues, a lot of these secular societies, like the Swedish one and the Norwegian one, may in 100 years be Muslim societies
Okay.
or be no longer secular. And I was
That's
curious if you thought
purely
that might
just
be a problem or
conjecture.
not. What?
I mean, that's just purely conjecture. You have no
Well,
way of
it's
knowing that's going to
statistical
happen.
projection that we can see from. I mean, we didn't pull these numbers out of our backsides. They come from extrapolating on trends that we're seeing right now in the real world and are measuring through actual numbers.
I still don't understand how this has anything to do with anti-theism as far as who migrates where.
Okay, so never mind. If we perhaps will table the trends with atheism generally worldwide, uh, I'm just trying to get a sense of. So in your mind, the world is secularizing. And what do you see as the big obstacles that anti-theism really tackles?
Okay. Well, at least right
Or the big
now in
problems in the world,
America,
right?
at least right now in America, we have a very active religious right that is trying to make our government into a more Christian government and to, pretty much follow the Bible. We have several laws that are going around where they're wanting to push the Ten Commandments onto public grounds and into public schools, because apparently that's going to make people not shoot them up. But I really don't see how that's really going to deter anybody. And so, I mean, I would say that just the rise of the very religious right, sort of like religious conservative kind of side, to take over a government and turn it into whatever religion suits their fancy, I think would be the biggest problem. Not as far as like anti-theism or anything like that. Like, I don't understand part of that part of that question, but I mean, as far as in general, in my personal view, what is the biggest problem right now? It would be the rise of the
Ten
religious right.
Commandments in schools. That's one of the biggest problems in this country.
Well, no, as far as this discussion goes and what we're having, I think that it is one of the biggest problems. I did not say that that was the biggest problem. Actually, what I said was that the rise of the religious right trying to take over governments is one of the biggest problems. I did not say it was the biggest. I said that it was a big problem.
Okay, so this is okay. It's a big problem, I guess. To me, uh, like for instance, we have I've gone to schools, I've gone to colleges that have had, posters of Malcolm X, and they've had posters of other controversial figures like Harvey Milk and a number of other political figures. I guess I don't see why posters or symbols in inside schools are that big of a deal. I mean, given what we see in colleges, right, and other locations, you have all sorts of biases going on that might be way more. Okay, I'll give you an example, right? So, like, how much is it of a problem is it that that we have professors in colleges uh, teaching communist principles to students? Is that like a big problem?
I well, I mean, I don't understand why you have such a hard on for communism. Uh, uh,
Well, it's not hard on for communism. It's a demonstration that,
no,
well,
but
what
you
I'm
keep
saying
bringing
is
up
that we have
communism at
teachers.
every
Teachers
turn.
bring ideology into the classroom, and we're seeing it a lot, right? Now, I guess I can see how it might be disturbing if a child has to walk by a statue of the Ten Commandments on the way to class. Perhaps that would be just traumatic. But given how many weird ideological things children are now subjected to in public schools, are you against all ideology being posed on children, or just religious ideology?
Well, I mean, as far as this conversation goes, I mean, I'm against religious ideology.
But are
I
you
mean,
opposed
I
to
don't
other
feel like
ideology
in
being imposed on children?
as far as
Why
this
is that?
conversation goes, I am very against religious ideology being indoctrinated into kids. I don't think that any certain ideology needs to be indoctrinated into anybody.
Well, I guess I suppose, but I mean, this is sort of
And
an
I like
interesting
how you
question.
played down like the whole Ten Commandments and everything. That was one example. The religious right coming up, taking over the government is, in that particular instance, is just the first step in them implementing a theocracy. And theocracies are not a good thing. And they only strip away rights. They only subjugate and oppress people. And
Can I
I
ask you a question, like, about this theocracy thing? Like, so I've talked to some people who consider themselves religious, right? Some people even say I'm one of them. But if these people like Rick Santorum, if they got everything they wanted, like everything, the United States would probably be a lot like it was in the 50s. Like the laws would be similar as they were in the 50s. Were we a theocracy in the 50s?
I never said that we were a theocracy in the 50s.
So if the religious right gets everything it wants, we won't be a theocracy.
You're asserting that everything that like Rick Santorum wants is the only thing that the religious right wants, and therefore, if Rick Santorum gets everything in his wildest, wettest dreams, it'll just be the 1950s, and it's not all that bad. Whereas, if you actually look at the 1950s, it wasn't all that great for like personal rights or civil rights or women's rights. I mean, you're setting us back, and its back is going to be closer to a theocracy while not being a theocracy. So, I
Okay,
mean,
so I mean, I don't. I assume that most people on the religious right's values don't differ largely from Rick Santorum's. So we're not saying that the religious right wants to make us a theocracy. Just it might want to make us a little bit closer to some hypothetical theocracy, right?
what about theocracy?
Well, you said that Rick Santorum, and since I said Rick Santorum was not largely different from other members of the religious right, that their agenda is not to implement theocracy, but it's rather just, in your words, to make us closer to something that we might call a theocracy. Can I ask you a question? When was the last time that we had theocracy in America? Or when was the last time we had theocracy in England?
I mean, I don't know. Right around the Revolutionary War, I would suspect. I mean, I don't know. I can't give you an exact date or anything like that.
Well, I'm just thinking of an example of a government in the West that is theocracy. Like, how far back would you have to go in the history of the West to encounter a theocracy of the type that you're talking about?
Okay, well, for one thing, America has never been a theocracy, but that doesn't mean that the religious right now don't want to turn it into a theocracy.
Has England ever been a theocracy?
Well, yes, England's been a
When?
theocracy. Uh, do you want me to pull up an exact date, or do you already
I
know
would
the
love one
date?
actually. I'm just trying to figure out like what society you think is the
What is a
theocratic one here.
theocracy to you exactly?
Well, you used it first, so I was assuming you had an idea.
Well,
To
yeah,
me, I'll answer the question. The last time we had anything approaching a theocracy, by my definition, would be the government of Oliver Cromwell in the 17th century in England, which lasted for 20 years. That was a theocracy. But since then, I don't know of anything in the West resembling a theocracy for the last 300, at least in Western European countries. Maybe there are some examples in Spain that might qualify. But since then, really, there hasn't been. Now, does that match your definition of theocracy?
well, I didn't exactly hear a definition in what you said, but that still,
An example of
regardless
Oliver
of when
Cromwell's
the
government.
last theocracy was, regardless of when the last theocracy was, it doesn't mean that they don't want a theocracy now. It doesn't mean that they can't turn it into a theocracy. I don't know why you're using these past examples of like, oh, there's never been a theocracy over here, therefore there can't be a theocracy.
No, I'm just trying to figure out what you mean by a theocracy, and I'm trying to get a good definition by going to a recent example, right? So if we're saying that the religious right wants to implement something that resembles Cromwellian government, we could evaluate whether that statement's true or not, right? Or if we're saying that the only thing that's a theocracy is something that looks like Saudi Arabia or Iran, we could evaluate the truth of that statement as well. But if we have a vague definition of theocracy, we'll never be able to tell whether the religious right's actually trying to implement it or not. Do you see the objection there?
No.
Okay, we can't evaluate whether the religious right's trying to turn this country into a theocracy if we do not know what a theocracy means or is. So I'm trying to get an idea
Okay.
of what a Western
Just
theocracy would even look like.
just in plain old English, right now, define what you mean by theocracy. Don't reference like Cromwell or anything like that. Just tell me what you think a theocracy is.
A theocracy is where people who are the interpreters of religious scripture are also the creators of secular legislation. That is what a theocracy is.
No,
Whether the bodies are
It wouldn't
not
be
separated.
secular legislation if they're using theistic doctrine in order to generate it. It would be theistic legislation.
Pardon me?
It would be
Yeah.
theistic legislation if it's
So you don't
based
know
on
my definition. What is
theistic.
your definition of theocracy then?
Well, it's a government that uses a particular religion in order to enforce control on its people. It
Wouldn't that be
uses the
all?
religion.
Wouldn't that, well, if you're saying any government that has religion as a social control, then wouldn't that be all governments before the 20th century, essentially?
No, I no. I mean,
Well, okay,
we didn't use
perhaps
the Bible. We
to
didn't use
clarify
the
here.
Bible in order to generate the American Constitution.
Well,
Like we did.
no. That would be my, okay. So my definition would be that in order to generate the Constitution or the laws, we consult the Bible, and then the people interpret the Bible. Go, okay, X, Y, and Z are now your laws based on my interpretation of the Bible. To me, that's what theocracy means. The religious interpreters are also the legislators. That's the definition. Now, you gave a definition that was good, but it was as good as it was a lot more vague than mine. You said it was any society that used religion as social control or as a way of control. I guess you didn't use the word social. But the problem is that if we define control loosely, then that definition of theocracy is so broad it accomplishes it comprises almost all of Western history.
No, I do not think that all of Western history is plagued with theocracy because of how you think I define it or how you define it or anything like that.
Well, we had different definitions, so I'm wondering. So, for instance, like if a society uses religion as social control, the way, say, for instance, not tutoring. That's a bad example. Say, for instance, the way that Victorian England used Christianity, right? Where it's a mechanism for controlling morals, controlling what is dignified. It's the animating essence of the society. Everyone obeys Christian morals, which means that society is controlled by Christianity. But at the same time, the government is secular and operates under principles that are entirely apart from Christian doctrine. Would that be a theocracy, in your opinion?
N- no.
It wouldn't. Okay. So it would literally so are you accusing the religious right of trying to replace the US Constitution with something that would put a series of theologians in charge of creating laws, or what, I guess?
No, but that's not also how I define theocracy. Theocracy is making laws based on religious values.
Well, in that case, Victorian society certainly falls under that definition of theocracy,
Okay, I don't
because the
understand what
people
that
who
has to
made the laws
do
in
with
Victorian
any of
society
this.
absolutely
Then,
based them on Christian morals.
okay.
What?
I, no, I still have no idea like why you're even bringing any of this up as far as like I don't even know what got us to this point. All you've been doing is arguing about my definitions and what's my definition for this and that and the other. You have to understand that this is a very tiring argument that you're trying to have with
I
me,
don't.
and I'm
I
really
think.
fucking tired of it.
Well, what do you want as
Could you
somebody
give me
like?
the Distributist dictionary so that next time I can like reorganize my brain to think in whatever the fuck terms you think?
I'm sorry, sir, but the definitions that I've been quizzing you over have been the definitions you provided me in this conversation. We were using your definition of
I didn't
secularism.
realize that I
In a
had to
previous
define
few
the entire
sentences, we were
fucking
using your
dictionary in order for
definition
us to have
of
a
theocracy.
conversation.
Pardon me?
I didn't realize that I had to define the entire goddamn dictionary in order for us to have a fucking conversation.
Well, we could use the dictionary definition of theocracy, but I think it would be closer to my definition. I
A
was
system of
just
government in which priests rule in the name of God or a god. That has
okay.
nothing to
Great,
do
that's
with
a stronger
secular legislation or anything like that. That is the priests making the laws for the land. And
And you think that the religious right's trying to implement rule by priests in this country?
I think that they're trying to implement based on a religion, which
That's
would
not the definition
include
you
the
just read to
priests
me.
and how they
I'm
interpret
sorry, man.
that
It's not the
religion.
definition you just read to me. It's not. You said you're confusing rule by priest with based on a religion, and that's where the confusion is coming in. Is the reason why we keep on going back to definitions is that you're employing sloppy definitions in your thinking to essentially use certain words to describe things you don't like and other kinder words to describe things that you do like. Therefore, you can place all the things you don't like behind certain labels and say, I'm against those labels. But you never have to admit that the things that you like might also have some of the same problems. And that's what I'm concerned about when we have this conversation, is that the sloppiness of the definitions means that it's very hard to see what you're against or what you're afraid of.
I'm not afraid of using any particular thing. And I think the whole priests bit right there, I mean, I think that that's very loose because at what point do you consider somebody a priest or at least an authority in the religion? I think that if you base your laws on a religion using people that understand the religion or what the fuck ever, however you use like the religion, I think that it is a theocracy. And I think that the religious right now, they are using the religion to include priests, preachers, whatever, in order to create laws. And I think that if they were to gain control, complete control of the government, there would be nothing to stop them from implementing these religious laws.
So would a law, in order to be a religious law, how would the law have to be devised?
I mean, it would have to be defined as a core component of religion,
So, for
of the
instance,
religion that they're
if I
using.
were a Christian pacifist and I voted against a war, would that be a religious if I made a law that we couldn't, say, sell arms to other foreign countries who are waging civil wars because of my Christian pacifism, would that law then be a Christian law?
Where are you getting Christian pacifism in Christianity?
No, I'm giving you an example. There are many Christian pacifists. If I were a Christian pacifist and I said, I want to uh, pass a law based on my Christian pacifism that says my army cannot give weapons to other countries in order to win civil wars. And I'm saying I'm voting this way because of my Christian pacifism. Would that make the law that I voted on therefore a religious law in the sense that you mean it in a theocratic sense?
Well, I mean, for one thing, that's not how our government works now. We vote for certain people to represent us, and
Yeah.
then the people that make up the law. I mean, it all depends on how the law is constructed. I'm not saying that anybody that
So our
uses their
laws
own
are
religious convictions or whatnot to vote for a particular law, that makes
our
the law
laws are based on a
religious.
number of people voting for them
You
based
know,
on conviction, right?
all right, all right.
That's
Listen,
basically how
it's
it works.
like it's about 9:30, and I'm really tired of you interrupting me while I'm talking and everything like that. So, I mean, I would rather just end the discussion and preferably probably never have it again.
Well, I'm just trying to get an idea of what this all means, right? Because it's unclear.
Okay,
Uh,
well, can we
I mean,
can
it
you
can take.
ponder
I'm
that in
trying
your
to
room
just.
later, or I mean,
I'm
can we?
trying to, dissect this so we can figure out exactly how I would know if a legislator passes a theocratic law or not, right? What would I need to know about how the legislators are voting to know that they're passing a law theocratically? In short.
No, I mean, I told you that I'm done with the conversation. So
Oh,
because I
okay.
mean, for
Well,
because there's it's impossible to have a discussion with you. It's impossible to get anywhere in a discussion because you keep wanting to come back to definitions, and I'm really just kind of tired of having the discussion in general.
I don't
So,
know, man. I think you're gonna. Those definitions are gonna have to be solid if you're gonna communicate. I noticed you had the same problem talking with Friended as well. I think
oh,
that perhaps
thank you for critiquing my own fucking
well, I mean,
shit.
you were
I'm
critiquing mine, so I decided to return the favor. But I think that the definitions might be a good place to start if we want to make the critique that anti-theism brings to religion more clear to people like myself who are interested to see what it really means and what's behind it.
okay. I mean, like I said, I'm done with the conversation. So,
All right, well, that's your prerogative. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to take a minute to answer the super chats, and you can certainly stay on if you like and participate in the conversation. Otherwise, have a wonderful night, and thank you for joining me for this discussion.
yeah, bye.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm still live. So yes, Caitlin Cooley mentioned how this probably was not a good idea for me to do at all. Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't know what I was walking into. I mean, he just said he wanted to talk about anti-theism, and then we get into this whole discussion about, definitions and shit. And yeah, I did get a number of super chats, so I was wanting to go through those as well. And I'm really sorry if people that gave me the super chats are not here anymore. Roger Wenzel says, "Here, GE, have a beer on me. I could really use it right now, but I don't have any beer here. Maybe I can persuade Casey to let me go out and get some." Frederick Voltaire Bastiat said, "Why no one is willing to discuss the dark side of scientism, human reason, and secularism? French Revolution, for example, double standards." I don't think. Well, I mean, the dark side of secularism. I mean, I feel like there's a really big problem with separating the idea of secularism from how people are implementing it. And I get the counter position of, well, you got to separate Catholicism or Christianity or religion in general from how people are doing it. But you see, I'm judging like the religion based on what it is actually saying. So I mean, I don't exactly see how that is like in like I don't see how that's me not handling it. I agree that there can be a number of assholes in that employ secularism or humanism. I would say that those that employ humanism to do massacres are totally antithetical to what humanism is. So I don't see it as a double standard, because the people that are using secularism to do these horrible things do not define secularism, but I am using Catholicism or religion in general based on what the actual religion claims. Nephilim Gabriel says, me and Roger is buying you a case for putting up with this dude. Thank you, Nephilim. Sight Future said, love his great argument. If I define all the worldviews, my personal worldview is the best. I agree. Thank you, Christina, for the super chat. Michael W. Roble says the biggest problem in the U.S. is homophobic, racist, moronic, theistic YouTubers. I don't know. I don't think that's the biggest problem, but I do think that those people are a symptom of the problem. Godless Iowan says, what an asshat. I agree, Godless Iowan. I think it was an asshat too. I get that he was trying to back me into a corner on almost every argument that he was using, and I was getting turned around and I guess how I was defining things. But again, I wasn't exactly prepared for the conversation. He just said, we're going to talk about anti-theism. It's not like, oh, we're going to talk about how, religion was in past governments or anything like that. I mean, as much as I like to seem like I'm an encyclopedia of knowledge, I'm really not. Donating a Canadian 666 SAB84 says, you deserve a beer for enduring the nonsense. I appreciate that. Christopher says, gee, over prepare yourself next time. Well, I mean, it's a little hard to over prepare when you don't exactly know what to prepare. I mean, no, I agree, honey. I'd never disagreed with you on that. I should have known exactly what he was wanting to discuss. But then again, the same thing happened with the friended conversation. We were supposed to be talking about how whether anti-theism is rational, but then he wanted to talk about a whole bunch of other different shit. Let's see. Smitty says, I think the biggest problem in the U.S. is that more people don't realize how liberal they are on economic issues because they're triggered by SJWs. Maybe. He's still going on about the definitions. Nice. He strawmanned his way through the entire debate, if you can call it that. Yeah. Somebody says, sucks. Always ask for specifics. I agree. I totally agree with you, Casey. I really do. And so I'll make sure anytime somebody just randomly asks me to talk about something, I will make sure to know exactly what they're talking about. Yeah. Oh, were they?
Yeah.
Not Joe Witness. Now we all need is a nice song to help us recover. Drop Dead Fred is coming to mind. Peachy, I am a model. You know what I mean. Somewhere. This was a bad idea. Let's see. It's all fine, GE. You had more patience than I could ever muster. I didn't really have a lot of patience in that one. KC had to be like, shut the fuck up. Let's see. Kara says he was completely pretentious, arrogantly preaching at you and presuming to teach you. Yeah. Gee, you should have had him define communism. Well, I mean, I'm guessing that he would define communism in a way that suits him, so I don't know. Like he kept jumping on definitions and everything like that, and I don't know. I understand the need for understanding principles in the same way, but like when you understand principles in a completely separate way than like I don't know, normal fucking conversation, I don't see the use. Sing the comments. Adam Smith, the amount of times you had to repeat the same damn sentence was ridiculous. He sounded like the love child of White Engine and Friended. Possibly. Can I nominate you for Catholic sanctity for your patience? I don't know, maybe. Puffalophagus, the ukulele saved today, though. I agree. I'm sure he's probably still going. Yeah, he is. Somebody on his channel said Godless Engineer doesn't know God. Oh, man. But anyways, heathens, I've got to go. Let's see. Kara said he was trying to trap you in your generalized definitions for things. You had a general idea, shared that general idea, and then he threw that through your teeth. Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you're, I don't know, when you're talking in such specifics about it, I mean, I feel like that kind of detracts from being able to have any kind of conversation. So yeah. I don't know. Please learn to play it. I'm working on it. It takes a while. Do you know how long I played trumpet before I actually learned how to play it? It takes a while. I can't just learn over a weekend. I just got this little motherfucker. Kara says he was acting autistic, and I'm autistic. He didn't really want to debate. He was just trying to corner you with non-questions. I agree. I think that he was trying to get bogged down in it, and he was trying to turn me around, which I think I let him a little bit turn me around in definitions, because I know
he was all over the place.
He was very all over the place. But yeah, I think I really need to go. I'm really tired. I've been working pretty much since like 5 a.m. this morning, so I think I'm gonna go and chill out with Casey, and maybe she won't be so aggravated with me. Anyways, heathens, I'm gonna go, and I will I'll see you guys later. Thanks for joining in. I really appreciate all of the super chats, and I hope that you guys have a lovely night. There's not going to be an upload for tomorrow, so I'm sorry about that. I did this instead, which I shouldn't have done, but you know. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a nice night, and I guess we'll see you on Thursday. Bye, guys.